We finished our study of Jephthah last week, and of all the judges, Jephthah was the hardest for me. I just, a bit of a rascal. But so we are sort of in between judges, and we'll have a lot to say about this, but chapter 13 starts the story of Samson. And so between there, we meet three minor judges. And so whenever we think of the book of Judges, we really think about the middle section, starting with Othniel and ending with Samson. We think of the big names, like Ehud, because that's a funny story. Deborah, that's a funny story. Gideon is a well-known one, is merry men of 300. And, of course, Samson. These are the stories we think of. And even if you know your Bible well, you may know of Othniel, and you may know of Jephthah or Abimelech or some of those. But we really think of those major judges. But when you read through it, there's actually several what we might call minor judges. Minor not in the sense that they're insignificant, but there's just the space dedicated to them is very small. So Shamgar is the first one that comes to mind. Shamgar is awesome. And there's a lot of parallels between Shamgar and Samson later on. And so what we see here are three additional minor judges. But more is going on here than just the author thought they would include three little vignettes. There is a chronological tale here, but it actually prepares the reader for Samson. So remember that Jephthah, which is mostly chapter 11, first part of chapter 12, the story of Jephthah was introduced by two of these minor judges. There we go. So you can read it up there. There we meet Tola, the son of Puah, and Jair, the Gileadite. And you remember that Jephthah was a Gileadite. So these minor judges, these guys, looked over a period of peace and prosperity, and then we got Jephthah. So they took the chaos of Abimelech, managed to correct some of that, and then, instead of going in the right direction, we get Jephthah, a man of violence and chaos and everything. So here you have two minor judges. Then we get Jephthah, a larger story, and it is followed by three minor judges. So you can see that the way it's structured is on purpose. And these are, I believe, the last of the minor judges. And Samson is, I think, the last judge. And then we get a civil war narrative in the book. And what we also have here is chronology. You have Jephthah, who is followed by Ibzan, who we'll read, followed by Elon, followed by Abdon. And then he is followed by Samson. So there does seem to be some chronological stuff. Well, let's start here with Ibzan of Bethlehem, verse 8 to verse 10. After him, so it's after Jephthah, which he dies, verse 7. After Jephthah, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters he gave in marriage outside his clan, and 30 daughters he brought in from outside for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. That is all we get about this cat. Nothing else. We just don't have much. So what we'll do with each of these is we want to look at their name, we want to look at their legacy, and we want to look at their death and burial. Start with their name. Ibzan, this word comes from the root word meaning swift. Do with that whatever you want. First name Taylor. Anyways, so I don't know why I didn't think of that earlier. So Ibzan, swift, maybe he could run fast. He is from Bethlehem, and immediately our ears perk up because we know that city. I don't know what a Gileadite is, but Bethlehem, I can sink my teeth into that. But I'm going to disappoint you. It's not the Bethlehem I don't think that you're thinking of. In the ancient Israel, there were two Bethlehems. There's what's called Bethlehem of Zebulun, and then there's Bethlehem of Judah. And most agree that Ibzan is of Bethlehem of Zebulun. Now, there's some who would argue against that, and we'll actually show if that's wrong, why that may come into play. But now we need to note that in Judges, whenever it's Bethlehem of Judah, it tells us it's Bethlehem of Judah. So here is two examples, and I think I got a third. So in chapter 17, now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah. from the family of Judah. So it clarifies Bethlehem and Judah. Here's another one in chapter 19. Took a concubine as a Levite, Bethlehem in Judah. One more, same story. He said, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to Ephraim. So it clarifies which Bethlehem we're talking about. You'll notice here that he is Ebson of Bethlehem, which would put him in a different tribe. Now, this detail could be significant because if you ever read the ancient rabbis, so these would be the rabbis that influenced the Second Temple Judaism, the era of Jesus. One of the common, I don't know about how common it was, but one argument that was made by biblical scholars, Old Testament scholars, is that we may know this guy by a different name. So let's say I'm wrong, and he's actually of Bethlehem in Judah. Can you think of anyone else? So so you Bible nerds, here's your test. Can you think of anyone else from Bethlehem in Judah in the days of Judges who is a prominent figure? And if you need another hint, I'll give you one. Can you think of any?
That would be Naomi's husband.
Yes, Ruth's husband, Boaz.
Yeah, he was written.
Well, Naomi's husband is Elimelech.
Yeah, and he left Bethlehem to go.
Yeah, but Ruth ended up marrying Boaz.
Correct.
So there are those who argue that Boaz and Ibzan, this is an old argument, you won't find it very much, that this is the same person. Now, and the argument really comes down to a few things. One of them is the location of Bethlehem, if he is from Judah. I don't think it holds water. There's nothing in Ruth that gives us the impression that Boaz fathered 60 kids. We don't get that at all. In fact, we get the impression for some reason he's single, perhaps a widower in Ruth. When he shows up, the question is, why is this wealthy businessman in ancient Israel, why is he single? That would have been bizarre. And the most prominent answer is that he's a widower. And so this character is clearly a polygamous. I think it's obvious. He has to have multiple wives. And in order to have all those kids, of course. So that's just a neat little detail. If this is Boaz, I don't think it is, he would be an ancestor of David and thus an ancestor of Jesus. Again, I don't think that is, but that's information I came across and didn't know what else to do with it, so I shared it with you. Put that in your back pocket. You'll never use it again. Let's talk about his legacy here. The text highlights no real accomplishments for him. There's no battles, there's no wars, no armies, nothing. He is remembered simply because of the number of kids he raised. How about that? Now, let's be honest. If just beyond the numbers, you die, and the only thing people know about you is that you were a dad or a mom. I would argue as a Christian, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. One of the things you'll find with young men, usually young men in their 30s, young men in their 30s start to panic. I bet you did this. I know I did this. Is you start to panic thinking, oh no, I wasted my 20s. Because when you're in your mid-30s, you're already thinking, I'm old now, right? And then now that I'm 40, I'm thinking, man, 30, I was a kid. When I hit 50, I think, man, 40, I was a young guy. But I found this. A lot of them, they think I've wasted my best years. Old age is nearer than I would like to admit. And one of the things I like to tell young men is that one thing, you don't hit your peak as men to your 40s and 50s. That's another issue. The other thing is, actually, if the only thing notable about you when you die is that you were a good husband and father, then you have been a faithful member of the kingdom of God, and you should die happy. Yes, I know every young man and every adult man wants to take the world by storm. Good. Be ambitious. But there's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, all of those things I pursued and accomplished and everything, but here's what I want to be known as. I was a good husband and father. So we don't know much about Ibzan. And maybe he had an army. Maybe he went to war. Maybe he fought battles. I don't know. But what he's known for is he fathered many kids. Now, I don't like how he fathered all these kids with multiple wives and women, but nevertheless, the size of one's family in the ancient world was a sign of wealth and prestige. Remember that Abraham is wealthy, but he's childless. And so to him, he had nothing. right? He was a tribal chieftain. I mean, he rounded up troops and went to war, and he still had this sense of poverty about him. This guy has a lot of kids, and this is not unusual. So compare Ibzan with, say, Gideon. Judges 8, Gideon had 70 sons. We'll come back to this number here in a minute. His own offspring, he had many wives. And so we should assume, since this guy has 60, so should we take the significance of 60, 6 times 10, so it's not the perfect number, as 70 is. So is that significant? But he has 30 sons, 30 daughters. And this, of course, is contrasted with Jephthah. Jephthah had one daughter, had no sons, which was a big deal back then. He had one daughter, and he gave her up. So we get this contrast. Jephthah dies, and the next guy comes in. He's the opposites. We know nothing about battles, wars, or fights. All we know is, so he is not what Jephthah was. He was what Jephthah was not. He must not have been a great warrior fighter who loved to go to battle. At the same time, he was a man with a large family, unlike Jephthah. Those contrasts, I believe, are on purpose. So not only did he raise 60 kids, can you imagine what Christmas was like? Or remembering all the birthdays. My goodness. Can you imagine what August would be like if you had 60 kids? My goodness. It's like August to October, everyone's born. In Amanda's family, it's another Christmas. I've had to say, look, if you're over 18, you're not getting anything from us. There's just too many of you, all right? Anyways, that's neither here nor there. But he obtained husbands for each of his 30 daughters, which expands his influence. You'll notice there that they were given into marriage outside of his clan. We'll see this with Jephthah. We saw it with Jephthah, and we'll see it with another, is that they were tied to their clan, Jephthah the Gileadite. Well, here what you have is a man of great influence. He's bringing son-in-laws in from other clans, thus extending his influence beyond Bethlehem. So you can see that he must be wealthy. He has prestige from having a large family, and he would dominate his clan, but also he's bringing other clans into his orbit, which expands his reach. And so, again, this contrasts with Jephthah. Jephthah seems incapable of cementing alliances. Every time he tried diplomacy, it led to war with the Ammonites and then the Ephraimites. This guy is the opposite. He doesn't want war. He seems to want diplomacy and peace. And so the advantage of his leadership is stability. Jephthah was a fighter, a great fighter, but a poor leader. This guy is more of a governor. Jephthah's temperament kept him from governing well. But fortunately, he was followed by someone, though pagan, no doubt, managed to lead effectively. And you'll notice how long did he lead. He judged Israel, there at the end of verse 9, for 7 years. This, of course, is contrasted with Jephthah as well. Jephthah, in verse 7, he led for 6 years. It's only a year difference. But that number is significant. Jephthah, an imperfect man of violence, he judges for the number of man, 6. This guy does it for 7, a more perfect number. I think we are to draw some conclusions there. But then you'll notice his death, verse 10. He died and was buried at Bethlehem. What is striking is how cold the text is. Yeah, he had a bunch of kids, served 7 years. Yeah, he died. Put him in the ground. Next, it's just cold. Cold. I mean, you just compare this with the burial of Jephthah's daughter. People come and mourn her and celebrate her life and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, Ibzan, this guy who judged Israel, influential guy, yeah, he died. Put him in the ground. The end. Let's move on. It's just so cold the way it's written. And so, just like that, the narrative moves on, and we got to move on as well. He gets 3 verses. And so that leads to Elon the Zebulunite. Now, less words are dedicated to Ibzan's successor, Elon. So you got Taylor Swift, and now we got Elon Musk here. I'm seeing a theme. So we'll read it, verse 11. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Notice the repetition. Then Elon the Zebulunite, again the reputation, died and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. Notice Zebulun's mentioned 3 times. 3 times there. Interesting. Okay, his name. His name means oak or terebinth. Do with that whatever you want. Remember, it was such a tree that Abraham built an altar in Genesis 12. That oak tree plays an important role in Genesis. And he's buried in Aijalon. Archaeologists have been unable to find this location, and other historians, but it's without a doubt in Zebulun. That's about all we know about him in terms of his background and whatnot. What is his legacy? Well, once again, we have nothing. We don't know, did he lead anyone in the battle? Did he fight any wars? Did he have a temper? I mean, we just don't know anything about him. And less is said of him than about Ibzan, and we had virtually nothing about Ibzan. So we don't even know if he was a dad. We don't get nothing. Do you have any kids? If he did, how many did he have? Did he have 31? Did he have 29? I don't know. We're just not told anything. How did he come to the power? Did he fight any battles, win any wars? All we know about this guy is that he judged for 10 years. Now that, too, I think, is significant. 10 and 7 function in similar ways in the Bible. We'll come to the number 70 here in a minute. So I don't think it's an accident. You go from a guy who ruled for 6 years, which was a brief time of leadership. He gets 6, not a good guy, followed by 7, followed by 10. So yes, it's 17 years yet, yes. But what we need to see is those numbers 7 and 10. So after a period of chaos with Jephthah and violence, perhaps we should read here, there was a period of peace and diplomacy and that sort of stuff for 7 years and 10 years respectively. And then we're told he died. Again, it is just as cold as it was Ibzan. He died and was buried in a land we don't know much about, in the land of Zebulun. Notice again that perhaps in many ways he's the opposite of Ibzan. Ibzan brings people from outside of the clan in. This guy is defined by the clan of Zebulun. And there's nothing that tells us he was involved outside of that land. We just don't have anything. I mean, this is it. And so maybe he was an effective leader. I mean, he served for 10 years as opposed to 7, so longer. I don't know. Was he more successful at diplomacy and keeping the peace? I mean, we just don't know. The best details we have is that number 10, and that's it. Okay, let's do this last cat, Abdon. Abdon, the Pirathonite. He's a pirate. He is the final of the 3 minor judges out of the Jephthah, and he mirrors the previous 2. Verses 13 to 15. After him, so after Elon, Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. And Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried at Parathon in the land of Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. Well, we got a little bit more here. Still, who was Superman? Ah, look at you. A good comic book reference. So happy tears. Happy tears. I can make some references to Lord of the Rings if you want me to. What's that? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I owe $1 now. For the record, Superman's father was Jor-El, and his name was Kal-El. So he probably had a cousin named Hillel. There you go. Any other comic book nerdum we need to talk about? Now we're singing my song. All right, so what do we do with Abdon here? Well, his name means service or servant. Do with that whatever you want. Son of Hillel. Hillel is it's a Hebrew term for when you learn Hebrew. My Hebrew was awful even when I was taking it. There's a conjugation, it's called a Hillel, I think. There's a good chance I'm wrong. I'm doing this off the top of my head, and I did not do good in Hebrew. I almost did not finish my degree because of Hebrew. I'm not making that up. I just struggled with Hebrew. So Parathon was west of Shechem, so that's In terms of background, that's about all we know. What about his legacy? We do have a little bit here. One, like Ibzan, he raised a very large family, likely through the same means of multiple wives. I think we just should assume that. Instead of 30 sons and 30 daughters, 60 in total, 10 times 6, he's remembered for having 40 sons, no mention of daughters, probably because of the symbolism of the numbers here, as well as 30 grandsons. So if my one county math is right, that is 70. So the number 70 is significant in the Bible. It is, again, by my math, 7 times 10. So we saw 7 plus 10 with the first two. Now we see 7 times 10, and it seems purposeful. It's 40 plus 30, yes. But 70 is often understood with the 7 times 10. Let me give you a few examples of where this shows up. The descendants of Jacob who come into Egypt are 70 total. And that's repeated at the end of Genesis, and here I'm quoting the beginning of Exodus. How many nations are there in the table of nations in Genesis 10? There are 70 of them. Which, by the way, it's worth noting, depending on your manuscripts, how many did Jesus send out 2 by 2 during his ministry? 70. Some manuscripts say 72. I think the best ones say 70. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think 70 is the best argument. How many elders were appointed in the wilderness of Israel? 70. By the way, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament is called the Septuagint, which is the Greek word meaning 70, because it goes, Israel got 70 translators to translate the Old Testament into Greek after Alexander the Great and all that sort of stuff. How long was Israel in captivity in the days of Babylon? 70 years. And what's the language? Jeremiah is told, y'all going to go in until the years are made complete. 70, 7 times 10. So Abdon, in addition to that, Abdon comes from the Ephraimites. Now, remember the Ephraimites, we read about them. We've read about them a few times. The Ephraimites are easily offended. Now that we're modern people and advanced, we're not easily offended anymore. That's one of the things we outgrew when we discovered the light bulb. Right? And we agree on that. There's nothing I said that's false. No one living today is easily offended. If you still don't believe me, I recommend you try social media. Because you can put something on social media and everyone assumes the best about you. You meet someone new and they think the best about you automatically. But back then, it wasn't always like that. You remember that the Gideon went to war with the Ephraimites. Remember what they did? They showed up ready to fight, and Gideon was able to talk them down. Jephthah went to fight, and he didn't have the Ephraimites, and he didn't call them up. Apparently forgot to text them. And they showed up, not to have a discussion, but to have a war. And you remember that Jephthah managed to slaughter over 40,000 of them, and he was able to determine by their accent. They said Sibboleth instead of Shibboleth. Those weirdos from Ephraim. This guy, a few verses after Jephthah dies, we discover is an Ephraimite. And remember, after over 40,000 of them are slaughtered, this nearly likely wipes out the tribe. Then we read a story. We get a Gileadite, and now we have a Zebulunite, and now we have an Ephraimite. And he has 40 sons, 30 grandsons. Within 2 generations, he almost exclusively, it seems like, with all the information we have, is almost able to repopulate the entire tribe. You can see God's faithfulness to his people. Now, obviously, there are other people having kids, but you're now 3 generations removed, presumably, maybe not even that far, but the Ephraimites are being blessed by God despite all the violence, despite all the paganism. God is keeping his promises to his people. So Jephthah didn't have any kids in the end of it. But here we see, outside of Elon, an emphasis on children. So we see the restoration of the tribe of Ephraim, both numerically and politically. They wanted to be center stage in fighting for Israel. Here they're finally doing that with Abdon. So Now, the most significant detail here is the reference to 70 donkeys. So you got the 40 sons, 30 grandsons. They ride on 70 donkeys. Now, when you and I hear donkeys, we think of, and I should have put a photo of this up here, we think of Donkey from Shrek. Shrek was one of 2 movies my wife and I watched over and over and over again when we were dating. The other was the first Ice Age movie. We love Sid the Sloth. None of y'all have kids within the last 20 years, I'm guessing. Okay, so Ice Age was great. Shrek is awesome. But Donkey is he's just a babbling fool. And he's a hilarious character. He's great. That's what we think of donkeys. Do you see a donkey now? You think of Donkey. It's funny he becomes a stallion. That's just so funny in the second Shrek. Anyways, in the ancient world, it wasn't like that. Donkeys were actual royal creatures. And they were signs of wealth and royalty. Let me give you a few examples from the Bible. They were signs of wealth. When God blesses Abraham and his descendants, what does it say? The Lord greatly blessed my master. He has become great. I think this is when they're going to go find Isaac a spouse. He was giving him flocks, herds, silver, gold, male servants, female servants, camels, donkeys. So what's the sign of wealth? Not cats. That's in the text. And we can agree. No one says, look, this guy's loaded. He has like a dozen cats. You've never said that. You have never said that in your life. But donkeys in the ancient world was a sign of wealth. Much the same way horses are now. I heard someone once say that in the turn of the 20th century, or as cars were starting to come out, so a little later, it used to be horses were for the poor, cars were for the rich. Now, cars are for the poor, we all have them. Horses are for the rich. You and I do not live in houses as nice as the ones right here on Versailles Road. We can walk to nicer property for 4-legged horses than we can to our own homes. You got to be wealthy to have horses. Here's another one. The man increased greatly, had large flocks, female servants, male servants, camels, donkeys. I'll give you one more just to prove. No, those are good. So there's wealth. They're also associated with royalty. So the king said, take with you the servants of your Lord and have Solomon, my son. This is when David is dying and he wants to make sure Solomon's crowned king. Have him ride on my mule, not my horse. Now Caesar would want to ride on a horse because horses are symbols of power and military might. And so Caesar, when he would conquer, would want to show up on a horse. But in periods of peace, you would want a donkey or mule, because those were images of peace. So what kind of king is David leaving behind? And what kind of king does he want Solomon to be perceived as? Not as a warmonger that's going to conquer, but as a wise leader who will bring peace. Not with a sword, not with a stallion, but with a donkey. 2 Samuel 16, Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on. So this is clearly royal. By the way, what does Jesus ride in on? A donkey. An unused donkey, which is particularly significant. Yeah, Don.
Those horses were also as dangerous as a soldier. They were trained for war.
Yeah.
And they were dangerous. They kick you going forward.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yes. So in Lord of the Rings, right, when Saruman organizes the men of the hill, okay, it's $2 I owe you now. I couldn't help myself. You're going to poke the bear every Sunday morning, aren't you? Not about the Bible. You're done with the Bible. You're just going to do Lord of the Rings. Well, then you just get the eagles to fly to Mordor and destroy it. Anyways, what were we talking about? Donkeys show up in Judges, okay? Here you go. Judges 5. This is the song of Deborah after the victory. Tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys. Sit on rich carpets. Judges 10. This is one of the minor judges. I think this is Jair. He had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys. Does that sound familiar? So you can see that Jephthah is opened up with these minor judges with an emphasis on peace, prosperity, rulership, family, all that sort of stuff. The story ends with 3 minor judges, and they conclude with the same language of large families riding on donkeys. So we see that this is a period of relative peace and everything else. Now you'll notice that he serves for 8 years as judge. This is, of course, longer than Ibsen, but I don't know if 8 has any special meaning or anything in it. So combined, if my math is right, these 3 men served for 25 years. Now that's significantly shorter than a lot of the major judges. They're serving for a lot longer. Mark? Yeah.
Do they die at the end of their judgeship? It doesn't say.
Right. Yeah, we just don't know. We don't know. Did these guys with all these sons, did their son become judges? I mean, we just, if so, how did that work? You know, because it says a guy after them became a judge. It's tough to know. All right, and in verse 15 we get his death. This is the longest account of these minor judges in terms of death. Verse 15. Then Abdon the son of Hillel, not related to Jor-El or Kal-El, the Parathonite died and was buried at Parathon, there's the repetition, land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. That detail is interesting, isn't it? What do we do with this? Well, he's buried in Ephraim, which again is the one tribe, but he's buried on the side of the Amalekites. This seems to be disputed land, if I'm reading it right. The Amalekites are there, Ephraimites are there. Uh-oh. But what's interesting is the next story, Samson doesn't fight the Amalekites. He fights the Philistines. Well, that ruins a good story. What comes of this? I have no idea. Who are the Amalekites? Well, they're bad dudes. They are a nomadic group who lived in southern Canaan. They were a thorn in Israel's side. Remember, it's the Amalekites that attacked them in the wilderness. They're always attacking Israel. They're terrible people. They may be associated with the giants, the Rephaim and others. They show up. We cannot chase that rabbit. So here's one example. Remember that the spies go in and they say there's giants in the land. And in the same passage they reference the Amalekites. There's some debate over this. In I think Exodus, they're connected with the Rephaim, which are also associated with giants. Do with that information whatever you want. But what is clear is that we come to the penultimate judge. And the Canaanites, here the Amalekites, are still in the land. The whole purpose of Joshua and the judges was to cleanse the land of the Canaanites. Because what happens, and what we've seen in Judges, is that the people of Israel follow the way of syncretistic religion, which ultimately poison Jewish religion. And so you get Jephthah where he knows enough Jewish history to sound like he's read his Bible, but then you look at him and you think, the dude is clueless. He clearly is unaware that you shouldn't sacrifice your own daughter, among other things. And then you get, okay, these 3 guys, they seem okay. Look, God's really blessing them. They're bringing peace. This is great. And then we get, yeah, but he's buried on Amalekite land. And then you're asking, why are the Amalekites still there? Because God is constantly saying, you got to cleanse the land of them. And the Amalekites will show up in the days of the kings and everything else. In fact, Esther and her people were almost killed by a descendant of Amalek, Haman. He's an Amalekite. And what does he do? He tries to wipe out the people of Israel in the days of the Persian rule. So we get to the end of this chapter before Samson, and we think, man, things are still a mess. It's the same story over and over again. Why won't Israel just figure this stuff out? So what do we do with this passage? You know, you may say, well, that's a fun little study. But why in the world do I care about these 3 guys who I can't pronounce their names? Taylor Swift, Elon Musk, and Abaddon. There's a Revelation reference to you. What do we do with these things? 4 things. I don't know how many I have. Number 1, the point of this passage is to introduce us to Samson. It sets the everything for Samson. Much like those minor judges in chapter 10 set things up for Jephthah, these set things up here. I've shown this. Compare. No, that's not what I want to show. If you look at, we've already talked about. So Jephthah is bookended between the same things. Also, I want you to notice the language of spiritual decline in both stories. Here, after you get the two minor judges in chapter 10, it begins with the people of Israel did again what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals and Ashtaroth. Okay? Well, what does the story of Samson begin? So the story of Jephthah begins with they served other gods. They did what was evil now as a god. The story of Samson, chapter 13, verse 1 says, people of Israel did again what was evil in the sight of God. So this is setting up for us. Here comes another major story. It's going to be a lot more detailed, but it's the same story. Different details, same story, and it's tragic. Interestingly, the rise of Samson brings the number of judges to 13. So there are technically 13 tribes of Israel, with 2 of them being half tribes. However, and Don, I'm going to need your help here. Will you try to hit Control and click on that, see if it'll pull up a map? If it doesn't, no big deal. I found this map and I thought it was cool. I assume it's accurate. Shamgar is out in the middle of the sea. It may not work, that's fine. I just couldn't figure out how to put it on here. But there are 13 judges. Some are major, some are minor, of course. And what you'll find, you have to scroll down. It won't fit on the same one screen. Here you can see where they are. Shamgar's number 3. He's out in the sea. He's fighting the Philistines. But you can see that most of the tribes feature a judge of some sort. Not all of them. But what you end up in this period of however long, 400 years, however long this period is, a lot of debate regarding that, is you get judges all over Israel. So what you have then is a period of uncertainty and chaos. Maybe the north was having to fight off people over here, but the south were okay. But by the time the north figured out, the west is having to deal with it. And then the southeast is having to deal with it. And God is constantly raising up for them deliverance. But what you have is a confederacy of tribes, not a unified nation. And in the book of Judges, we're saying, okay, you got 13 tribes technically. You got 13 judges. And by the end of the story of Samson, it's even worse than the way it began because it ends in civil war. Because they're not unified. And what is the tribe that leads to the worst civil war in Jewish history at this point? It's Benjamin. And what happens in the story of Samuel? The last judge is Samuel himself. And what do the people want? By the way, 14 if you count Samuel, that's 7 times 2. What do the people want? They don't want Samuel because his kids are corrupt. They want a king. And what tribe is that king from? Benjamin. The ones that caused all the bloody warfare. But we're starting to think maybe now we have a unified king. Maybe now we can clear the land. Maybe now we can have peace. But what do we get with the kings? It's the same story. It's the same story all over again. All right, Don, if you'll go back over there. I can send you a link. I just found this helpful. You can click on the numbers and it tells you who it is and everything. Here's the thing. The ongoing influence of Canaanites and religion and culture. It's worth noting that 2 of these 3 men father extremely large families. And it points that they were living like ancient Near Eastern leaders of their day. And it's further evidence that Israel has been overtaken by Canaanite religion. They are Hebrews ethnically. They are Canaanite politically and religiously. They talk like Canaanites. They act like Canaanites. They live like Canaanites. They're Canaanites. And it's sad. We read this and we think, man, they could be better than this. Not. I was going to share this and I ended up deleting it. There was we found a coin, several coins. They were Hebrew coins with Canaanite pagan deities on them. And a lot of people responded with, see there, the Bible's wrong. They were syncretistic. And we're all like, yeah, that's what the Bible says that happened. Right? That's like the main narrative of the Bible. Have you read it? Pick a page in the Old Testament. You'll get that message. Thirdly, rest is not. Remember, that's the big go. They had rest in the land 40 years. We talked about that last week. Rest is not a political issue. It's a theological one. So if you read these 3, it sounds pretty good on the surface. They serve for 7 years. They serve for 8 years. They serve for 10 years. And they have large families. They're bringing clans in. The Ephraimites seem to have grown and have peace with the other tribes. And we think, okay, things seem to be all right. But then you're reminded there at the end, oh no. What's wrong with Israel is not leadership. It's worship. If only I can think of a good application in a big election year in the United States of America. You helped me come up with one. The issue is not leadership, it is worship. And often we think leadership is a good replacement for what the real problem is, worship. If we have the right leader, then we can just figure out the worship problem later. Before long, you're going to realize that the reason everything is a mess is because we are idol makers and idol worshipers. And this is America right now. So remember that when you go to the polls. We need Jesus. And it's worth noting here, if you compare these three minor judges with the two minor judges in chapter 10, we see the continued decline of Israel. So Tola and Jair in chapter 10, they serve 23 years and 22 years respectively. These three guys serve a total of 25 years total. Now, in the ancient Near Eastern world, if you have a long reign, people liked you. If you have a short reign, yeah, you're probably killed. Poisoned, something. So you go from long reigns, 22 and 23 years, to Jephthah and these three very short years of reigning. So as Israel continues to spiritual decline, its access to peace and rest remain distant. Here's the fourth thing, and then we're done. We'll call it a night. Death is a harsh reality. Given that details of these men's death and burial is as prominent as the lives they lived, I don't think we should miss that point. If we had time, I'd love for us to go back to Genesis 5 and read a genealogy, but you're probably bored enough as it is. In Genesis, right, you get sin and death enter the world. Chapter 3, right, they eat of the fruit, all that, cast out of Eden. Chapter 4, you get Cain murders Abel. And in the latter half of chapter 4 and the whole chapter 5 are genealogies of Cain and Abel. We always skip those. But if you look at those genealogies, it's clear what the writer wants us to get. All of them say he lived, he had a bunch of kids, and he died. He lived, he had a few kids, and he died. He lived, he had some kids, and he died. For a chapter and a half, 2 family lines. That's the message. And you read it, and it's a reminder of we live in a world where death is a harsh reality. All of these men died. And to the writer, that is as significant of a detail for the reader than the lives they lived. It's interesting, isn't it? You can go to most people's tombstones, and the two most important details you'll find on the tombstone is the year they were born and the year they died, and no detail in the middle. They could live 100 years. You don't know who they loved, you don't know who they hated, you don't know where they lived, don't know where they worked, don't know what they accomplished. All you know is they were born and they died. And then we, standing over the tombstone, realize the day will come when my great-great-great-great-grandkids will know no more details about me than I know about this stranger I'm looking at their tombstone. Death is a harsh reality, which means that in the book of Judges, the writer wants the reader to long for a better narrative. Judges is a story that's trapped in its own cycle of violence, death, and idolatry. And there seems to be no way to break out of it. So here we are, being tantalized with a story with the Amalekites, and there's no resolution. Because we have to draw our attention to somewhere else in Israel, to Samson, because you have to deal with the Philistines. And that story ends in death, where a massive number of people, including the judge, Samson, the most famous of all of them, he dies because of his own disobedience and idolatry. And then we get a story of death on a massive scale because Israelites are fighting against each other. And then it just ends. And who is at the middle of that civil war? A bunch of Levites who have idols. And you get to the end of Judges and you're thinking, is there a way out of this cycle? And of course there is. And the point of Judges is the point is to Jesus. He comes along and he rescues us from this cycle of death by conquering it himself. So yes, death is a harsh reality. But we on this end of Calvary know that death does not get the last say. And with it, chaos and division and violence. Christ rules and reigns even over the grave. So there is good news here. But you have to wait till Calvary to get it. Danny, did we miss anything? All right. I've tried to strain the gnat as best as I can with these cats.
I think too, though, that this stuff we're reading about these people and who God sent to war and who he didn't, that he can use anyone.
Yeah, that is a big theme in Judges, that God can write straight lines with crooked sticks. Yeah.
The thing about wives and things like that, you know, we keep forgetting about David. We keep him on a pedestal, but he had 10 concubines. I don't know how many wives he had.
Right.
He only had a few kids.
Yeah.
And the old Bathsheba was his love.
Yeah. Yeah. So what does that tell you about mankind? Our greatest need is Savior. It's our greatest need right now. It is not economic development or better tax policy, as much as I may want that. It is that we need a Savior. We need a Savior. This city needs a Savior.